All right, here we go. Today is Sunday, January 26th, 2025, and this is episode 294 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is the Honorable Mr. Callett.
Well, that may be questioned by some, but hello, sir. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. I am ordained. I've performed a marriage before, so maybe that counts.
I know my kids keep threatening to talk to you about officiating theirs.
My rates are incredibly reasonable.
Good deal.
We'll negotiate offline.
Good deal. So welcome everyone. I hope you've had a great week. I can't believe it, this deep into 2025 already. It's pretty impressive. Before we do get started, I want to just give a call out at the beginning, thanking our Patreon donors. So thank you very much. And also a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and not those of our employers. And I guess I should also say that if you do like what we're doing and want to also support us, you can do so on our Patreon site at patreon.com/defensivesec. And I'll put a link in the show notes. But thank you very much.
And if you're just a rich billionaire who wants to just support our lifestyle with lavish gifts, we won't say no.
Yeah, we'd be okay with that too. Absolutely. All right. So getting into our stories for today, the first one comes from theregister.com, and the title here is "Someone is slipping a hidden backdoor into Juniper routers across the globe, activated by a magic packet." And I think the lesson here is that you have to put a piece of cardboard over your Juniper router, right? So, oh wait, that's
magic cardboard. Yeah, maybe, but
magic cardboard. So the situation here is it's not publicly announced how this is happening, but some adversary is compromising through some means Juniper routers, half of which are configured to be VPN appliances, half of which are just, I guess, vanilla routers or serving us other purposes. But they're inserting a backdoor, which is relatively clever. It is in memory only, so it doesn't touch the file system. It listens on the eBPF interface for one of 5 different magic packets, so specifically formatted packets that I'm assuming you wouldn't normally see. If the router, which is infected with this issue, sees one of those magic packets, it makes an outbound outbound SSL connection, I guess is HTTPS, to the IP that made the connection attempt. And if that is successful, it then performs.
That's not quite.
Oh,
let me correct. That's not quite true. When it does the callback, it's to a specific IP.
Oh, it is to a specific. Okay, I thought it was to the one that made the call. Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, I was reading the full breakdown. Sorry, go ahead.
But it is interesting that once it makes that outbound connection, it also does some authentication. So the infected router will encrypt with a private key, or I guess it's the public key. It'll encrypt with a public key a random hash, which gets sent over to the other side, which then has to prove that it has the private key before it actually finally establishes the actual connection, which gives access to the operating system on the router. And it's unclear exactly what the adversary is doing once they have it, but the expectation is I think they're moving laterally through the victim's network once they have that access.
Now I'm questioning what I just corrected you on. Hang on. Thought it was to a specific IP. I'm rereading the. See, I did a lot of research today, and I'm getting confused. Maybe it was back to the IP that sent the magic packet.
Because
All
there
right.
was
Well,
some concern. There was some
yeah.
concern by the belief is that the adversary here was concerned that once the content of the magic packets became known, that other adversaries would try to co-opt their backdoor. And so
Mm-hmm.
they implemented this additional authentication, basically public key authentication mechanism, so that only the adversary who infected it would actually have access. So somewhat clever. Again, I think the frustrating part for me is that they're not disclosing how the initial compromise happens. Like, this is a post exploitation issue. And so we don't know if it's being done through credential phishing or some other yet to be disclosed vulnerability.
Yeah, I found it. Quoting from the full report, which was done by Black Lotus Labs as part of Lumen, while the magic packets could be sent from anywhere on the internet, the trigger packet contained a callback IP address. This is where the malware would send the challenge enough pass, spawn a remote shell to interact with the file system. Like in the prior campaign, the actors favors procured VPSs with the self-signed cert. The certificate for fingerprint can be found in the indicators of compromise on their GitHub page. The fingerprint was observed on the same IP, blah, 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 at the same time. So I might have read that oddly. It looks like you could have it go to a specific IP,
Okay,
not necessarily just the one that the magic packet came from.
I see.
So the trigger packet could contain a specific IP for that callback to go to. Okay. Sorry
You
for the
could you
confusion.
could you could configure it. Okay, that makes sense. We were both
Yes.
wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair.
But thank you for clarifying. But that's actually good. I think one of the lessons that I had is you really ought to be looking. And now it's difficult when you have something that's straight out intentionally connected to the internet. But if you have the opportunity to look for unsolicited outbound connections from your infrastructure devices, that's a good opportunity to catch things like this. Now, I think the challenge here is it probably would look like noise.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
but
a tough
but
one.
but there is an opportunity there, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. There was a couple things I found really interesting. The way that the Black Lotus Labs found this was they noticed just an interesting upload to virus total, and they went and
Mm-hmm.
investigated. This is very, very specific. It's very targeted. It's very quiet. Makes me wonder who did the original upload to virus total. Did they know? Were they curious if they would get flagged? That's kind of some odd tradecraft. Most folks know that if you go to virus total, often you're burning your malware, but maybe not. Maybe so much gets uploaded it gets lost in the cruft. It's interesting. I also wonder about like what was the goal? Like who's really behind this? Um, it's very very subtle. And from the report, they tried to figure out. So they tried to send out magic packets to see, who would respond, who was listening, and they only got 36 unique IPs in like a 6-month campaign. Who knows how accurate that is? But one of the things they found out was some of those were not just the what you would expect perimeter interface, but also a number of them were on the management interface that was exposed to the internet, which is not great. We need to stop doing that.
Please don't do that.
The one last thing I found interesting was I'm quoting directly from the researchers. Quote, we found it noteworthy that the magic packet malware is becoming an increasing trend in use against perimeter devices. First with BPF door and Symbiote, we suspect that this will only increase as greater difficulty in detection creates more trouble for defenders, and what reporting exists is solely the result of greater awareness surrounding this technique, which is
Yeah,
interesting.
I think the challenge that this points out is you can't rely on just a scan from, or the output of a scan from either your vulnerability scanner or something like Shodan to identify what is vulnerable. You're basically left with this, what is the population of routers that are exposed to the internet, and you have to kind of hypothesize. Now, I suppose that when they've identified what the magic packet is that's able to trigger it, then they can go do another round. But if you're not aware that it exists, like, you're just kind of blind.
We have no idea if like a patch exists to stop the initial infiltration route. We have kind of in the dark right now. They do recommend a couple things, just quoting from the research report. For users of enterprise-grade routers seeking to improve detection on this activity, we recommend the following hunt guides focused on BPF-based malware. So they reference a trusted sec blog and memory injection, which goes, I'm not even going to try to summarize, it goes very deep into memory analysis of what's running in memory. Useful, but very sophisticated. A Sandfly security blog also had a good write-up, Elastic blog, and then they also have a link to a detection blog for CDOR, which is what they think the malware is based on. And finally, searching your environment for all IOCs provided in this report. Sorry, IOCs, indicators of compromise. Review network logs for signs of data exfiltration, lateral movement. Well, it's such a vague recommendation, but sure. And then check for common persistence mechanisms. So it's interesting. This is an area I don't know that we've got a lot of, as they mentioned, a lot of awareness or controls or automated indicators of compromise built around yet. So it's an interesting one, though.
It's an unsatisfying one because there's more, it leaves you with more questions than answers. You know, one of the obvious responses, if you're concerned, is because it's not persistent, is to reboot your device. But the issue is you don't know how it got there in the first place, and also you don't know if you are if you're infected. So it would be really good, in my estimation, to first determine if you have it, if you have that implant. And then if you do, then you have to roll out your incident response program. But I think that the challenge is we just don't know how it got there. And so, although I will tell you, when I read the article, it leads me to believe that perhaps Juniper knows and isn't saying publicly yet.
Could be. I hate to say this, but this is sophisticated enough that it makes me wonder if this is a targeted nation state, sort of deep cover, get persistence and wait until you need it, as opposed to widespread further exploitation beyond this.
Yeah, and by the way, it's been going on since at least mid-2023.
Yeah. And my recommendation is reboot your routers about every 30 seconds, and I think you'll be in good shape.
It's true. If you have high availability, it shouldn't be a problem, right?
I suppose. You could just flip-flop, or just, it's okay. Everybody needs a little break.
It's routers going down, coffee break time.
That's right. And then a minute later, again. It would foster workplace collaboration, hallway discussions.
Think about all of the things that companies are trying to accomplish with their crazy back to office mandates. Like this would really solidify that, because now people would have to get up from their desk and they would have to go talk to each other.
Again, IT can be an enabler, bringing people together in hatred of the network.
This is such a good thing. This seems like there's an opportunity for consulting here.
I will await the Nobel Peace Prize Committee phone call.
Let us know how that works out, Brent.
Sit up, wait. They call in the middle of the night, I'm told. I'll be sitting there waiting.
All right, moving on. The next story comes from Bleeping Computer, and the title here is PayPal to pay $2 million settlement over 2022 data breach. Now, this is an interesting one. It's not your traditional issue. PayPal was sued by the Department of Financial Services in New York under, basically, for those of you who remember, about, it's been about 6 or 8 years ago, DFS released their was so popular Regulation 500, which levies a bunch of cybersecurity regulations on financial companies operating in New York, and that's what PayPal ran afoul of here. But the thing that happened was interesting to me. That the issue was not like a normal run-of-the-mill data breach, especially when you think about it through the lens of issues like Snowflake and some of the others. What happened here was that PayPal was providing tax statements, so the 1099 state tax statements, to their customers in an unredacted form. So as for those of you in the U.S., and you are familiar with this, but for those of you outside of the U.S., you have to file. You have to basically give PayPal enough information for them to file a certain form with the tax agency here in the U.S. And that contains a bunch of sensitive information, like your social security number, your address, and whatnot. Enough information that You could be used to perform identity theft and whatnot. Anyway, that 1099 information was available in unredacted form if you accessed their website, but you had to be an authenticated user. So you might say, well, that doesn't sound so bad. Well, the challenge is that they weren't requiring two-factor or multi-factor authentication at the time, and they were also not monitoring for or managing login, brute force login attempts or password stuffing attempts. And so they had some number of customers who fell victim to having their 1099 information stolen by bad actors through kind of brain dead password stuffing attacks, which is basically a very fundamental set of requirements that this DFS requirement 500, DFS regulation 500 requires you to, mandate the use of multi-factor authentication and not allow unlimited login failures and whatnot. So it's an interesting take because, again, we saw issues like Snowflake, where Snowflake had a big data breach, and I'll say that differently. From Snowflake's perspective, Snowflake's customers had a big data breach because their customers' passwords were somehow used either through brute force or phishing, who knows, but they weren't stopped. And so I think my takeaway from this is that the tides are turning from a service provider standpoint. I think the opportunity to pin the blame on customers' bad behavior for companies like PayPal and now so far Snowflake has gotten away with it. But I think eventually things like Snowflake will not work. That they'll not be able to hide behind that in the coming years would be my guess. Interesting times.
Yeah, if you're a SaaS vendor or a service provider and you've got this choice of like how much friction do you want to give your users, and if you're mandating MFA or mandating it, that could make it more difficult for your users. And so that's a product management choice that a lot of vendors have shied away from. Like you can turn it on if you want to, but we're not going to force it. But these sorts of things, like Snowflake and this, are shifting that liability. It feels like to me that the SaaS vendor is now on the hook for making sure that their customers don't do stupid things. Well, and stupid is harsh, but in this case, credential stuffing, 35,000 customer accounts. More than likely, these were reused account passwords that were found in data breach dumps, most likely, and they're just replaying them. So you've got a typical problem of customers reusing passwords in multiple sites, and bad actor gets that dumped password from another breach, attempts it, it works, they're in, they go to town. And that's PayPal's fault in this particular case of what New York thinks. So they said that PayPal took several remediation steps, masking sensitive data in the IRS forms, but that's kind of secondary to the problem in my mind. Implementing CAPTCHA and rate limiting for login attempts, mandating MFA for all U.S. customer accounts. So it's interesting. I think more vendors are going to be going down this path, either forcing you to use some sort of enterprise SSO, if you're an enterprise customer of a SaaS vendor, if you have SSO, or MFA or something. Rate limiting seems like a no-brainer. You want to be careful with just like automatically locking out accounts though, because that can be used for like denial of service attacks. But if you do 10 bad password attempts in a minute or something, maybe I slow you down a lot and let you only do 1 per minute or 1 per 5 minutes. So, I don't know. There's options. It depends on the sensitivity of it. I think the thing that really got PayPal in trouble is their financial, and they've got just a higher standard of care there. But I do think other software companies probably need to worry about this problem, or service providers, SaaS companies.
Absolutely. I think we're starting to see a shift. And look, it's not universal. So far, Snowflake has evaded, the fallout from that. But again, I think this is gonna evolve over time. And I think if you were to look back on this in 5 years or 10 years, I think most industries, providers like this will will be expected, whether that's enforcement actions by the FTC or the who knows, kind of unclear. But I really think the opportunity for companies to pin the blame on customers when customers do something that they should know, arguably, that they shouldn't do this. But I think the opportunity for companies to blame it, their customers, that time is coming to an end. Get on it. Secure your crap.
Agreed. Help you help your customers.
That's right. That's right. And I mean, look, we've talked in the past a lot about this, the impact to your brand and your reputation. And now, again, I don't know what to say about Snowflake. That seems like such an anomaly to me, but I really think
Did you just say that Snowflake was a special snowflake? Is that what you just said?
I think that is exactly what I said as I think about it now. But there is this concept of of shared responsibility, and I that given time. Now, there are, by the way, contrary indications. There was a report recently released that says that companies who are breached are no longer looked upon as disfavorably as they once were. And so I suppose there's a bit of a tension there. But I really think that if you at some point, if you have a consumer based offering, or maybe even a corporate based offering, and you're not taking the responsible precautionary steps in how you have things configured by default, I think it's going to work against you. And by the way, like, it's just the right thing to do. So I don't know what more to say about it.
If I were to play devil's advocate for just a moment, like, this is an argument you hear a lot from in the early days of online banking. If their login password process was too difficult, they would lose non-sophisticated customers. And
that's true.
I get that. But if the entire to a competitor who wasn't enforcing it, but if the entire industry shifts, everybody's in the same boat, which
very true.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right. So our next story comes from Bleeping Computer, and the title here is CISA. Hackers still... CISA : so it's not CISA hackers. Hackers still exploiting older Ivanti bugs to breach networks. So I do want to say that this is not talking about the most recent Ivanti bugs that are being used to breach networks. This is talking about vulnerabilities that were patched towards the middle of last year, 2024, are still being actively exploited, which means that they still exist in infrastructure. And some of them, by the way, were rated critical. And it hurts my heart that companies are getting hacked by 6-month-old critical vulnerabilities on devices that are sitting at the edge of their network.
For the love of God, just patch it.
Jesus Christ. So this one is in a CISA is talking about here is a set of vulnerabilities in the Ivanti cloud service appliances, which I think was the old LANDesk set of software, which, and by the way, good luck finding information about the Ivanti cloud service appliances on Ivanti's website, because goodness, I tried. You can find some support articles, but can't find a lot of sales material.
They're really just firing at all cylinders on this one, aren't they? They're doing great.
They certainly are. So anyway, it's an endpoint management, at least as far as I can tell. It's the old old LANDesk endpoint management tooling that is unfortunately able to deploy things like software and whatnot to your endpoints. And so it's kind of important thing to keep protected. But yes, we're seeing some number of successful compromises even today using these now 6-month-old vulnerabilities. 6-month-old. Let me say it differently. Vulnerabilities that have been patched 6 months ago. So,
yeah,
goodness, if you have it, by the way, if you have Ivanti stuff, and I will say, if you have of any stripe, you really need to make sure that you are on top of patching. I will say, broadly speaking, a lot of Ivanti stuff is the vulnerabilities have been exploited prior to there being a patch. And so if you have Ivanti and it is at the edge of your network, I strongly recommend that you perform some sort of triage to determine if you've been compromised, even if you've patched. So whether you continue to use Ivanti or not, that is not for me to decide. But this is a very problematic, historically been a very problematic set of software. Now I will say, they do point out in the article that Ivanti seems to be doubling down on improving the security of their offerings. And I think to some extent, some of the recent vulnerabilities disclosures have been a result of proactive actions taken by Ivanti. But we continue to see, and I think as late as like a week or 10 days ago, yet another round of vulnerabilities that were being exploited as 0 days. So
Jerry,
it's
in terms of doubling down, what is the result of multiplying 0 by 2?
fair enough.
I shouldn't be that harsh.
Damn you and your logic.
No, I shouldn't be that harsh. I'm being unintentionally cruel. Obviously, they're getting their ass kicked right now, and some of that we don't know. Could be a result of bad internal practices, could be bad luck, could be poor SDLC, could be all sorts of things. I don't know. But
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with Ivanti, I don't have any like insight into the inner workings of Ivanti, but I will
you
say
could have ended that sentence much, much earlier.
that's a fair point. But Ivanti
Sorry.
is a roll up of a whole bunch of different technologies. So like Landesk, and I don't even know who else. And so a lot of this technology the vulnerabilities that they're stumbling across aren't necessarily vulnerabilities that Ivanti proper introduced. It's quite likely that they are heritage vulnerabilities, and they're being uncovered right now because Ivanti, as we've said in the past, like it's their turn, it's their time in the barrel right now. People are just kicking the crap out of Ivanti's products, and so they're finding stuff. And because a lot of this stuff comes from older legacy companies, they're being very successful in finding vulnerabilities. And I don't know when it ends. I think Ivanti's going to have a long road ahead of them. They don't seem to be slowing down in terms of the arrival rate of exploited 0 days, which is concerning to me.
That's fair. I don't know if you know, but I heard from our friend Bob the other day. It's been a while. He's out of the Turkish prison, which is nice.
Oh,
But
good.
he was telling me that one of the software shops he worked for that did a lot of it, they had a problem with lots of people who built the earlier code bailing after the buyout. So they lost all of the intellectual property and tribal knowledge and historical knowledge around that stuff. And then the acquiring company had trouble maintaining it, fixing it, keeping up to date. Often, it's kind of, but again, when you adopt a puppy, you got to take care of the puppy, or it'll chew on your furniture.
Point. It's a good point. Look, I've been around for a long time, and I have seen the same thing. I've been acquired 3 times. The companies I work for been acquired 3 times, and every time I saw the same pattern. Right, the people who built the product, leave. They don't mesh with the culture, because typically it's a smaller company that gets bought by a larger company, and and as a small company person, I feel this deeply. Like, you don't mesh with the large company culture, and so you end up leaving for a variety of reasons, and you multiply that by a bunch, and suddenly you don't have people left who understand the product anymore. And so and look, I don't have any particular insight into Ivanti. Maybe they take awesome care of their acquired companies. I just don't know. But I do know that most all of their products that they seem to be having trouble with, had a different name on it, 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's a very common problem that we don't talk about much. I don't know is planned for much with a lot of the industry, because if you think about it, so you're an acquiring company, you buy some software shop, they're much smaller, and the people there want to work at a smaller shop, most likely because they're at a smaller shop. And now they're suddenly thrust into this new culture that they may not like. And I would say the majority of people want to go back to that small, probably startup type culture. But your existing software devs at the larger company are busy doing 1,000 other things on the existing software shop. And unless you're very intentional about transferring knowledge and building and spreading that tribal knowledge from the people you just bought to the people who are hopefully going to stay, which rarely happens, rarely do you have time for it, you have this rinse repeat problem of the people who built the code leaving and nobody's done knowledge transfer. And I've seen that a few times in my career. You've seen it a bunch in your career. I don't know if it's just an oversight of tech M&A or just we've been unlucky. I'm sure there's some companies that do it well, but it feels like we see more companies that don't.
I think there's a lot of reasons for it. Certainly when a company buys another company or they buy a product, they do it because they feel like there's synergies to be had. Like they feel like they can make more money off of it. They feel like
Mm-hmm.
they can. And now I don't know a lot about Ivanti, but I know that companies like Ivanti often will buy kind of the legacy things that have run their course, products that have run their course, and their approach is just to milk it until it finally its last customer moves off onto something else. I don't have any idea if that's what Ivante's business strategy is or not, but I know that there are a bunch out there. We've seen others like was it Progress and some other
Mm-hmm.
companies seem to have that kind of a business model. And when you have that, like you're not incentivized because it's not a strategic product. You're like the reason you bought it was not because you're going to go invest lots of development resources in it. It's because you're intending to ride it for all it's worth until the last customer leaves. But
But
again,
here's the flip side. If you don't take care of that puppy, you run this reputational risk of your name, your overall company name being dragged through the mud over and over again due to this sort of thing.
and I think that's where Avante is to be very candid. So they've, like I said, I think they've got their work cut out for them. I really think that patience is going to be running thin, you know, from a regulatory perspective, from a customer perspective. Like I don't know how I would be comfortable given, the history. Now, maybe like behind closed doors, there's, Vante has a really reasonable story that they tell to their customers. I don't know, but I would be concerned. That's where I'll leave it.
That's fair.
All right. So the next, in it. So by the way, they do have some indicators of compromise that you can search for, but again,
Step one is IOC number one is the name Ivanti.
I'll just go back to making sure that you are aware of where all your Avante wares are, that you know whether or not they've been patched. And I would, I would frankly, anytime you see a new critical or high severity vulnerability come out in the recent past, most of them have been exploited as 0 days, been exploited before a patch was even available. I would definitely take steps to try to investigate whether or not your device has been breached and be on the lookout for specific guidance related to that set of vulnerabilities that you're currently dealing with, because there may be some things that you need to do, like completely reset the appliance or what have you. So I gosh, I'm glad I'm glad I'm not in this business right now.
Good luck.
Godspeed. All right, our next story comes from Security Week, and the title here is Millions Impacted by PowerSchool Data Breach. The PowerSchool is a service provider for primary or for public, I guess it's really any kind of public schools. I think private schools use them as well. But sometime in the early part of January, which is 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was uncovered that one of their customer support portals had been breached. And through kind of dribs and drabs of information leaked, not necessarily leaked, but provided by the company and also by the adversary to the media, that it's come out that this portal was accessed by a stolen credential, which was not protected with multi-factor authentication, and there was quite a lot of data impacted by this, an unfortunate amount of data. So the Toronto, just as an example, the Toronto District School Board, who was a customer of of PowerSchool says that students who were enrolled in the Toronto school district between September 3rd of 1985 and December 28th, 2024. So like 39 years of data
That's impressive.
were stolen. And apparently it was about 100 and they say 150 fields for each student, and then 97 fields for the for staff. Little unclear exactly what all those data fields were, but it does appear that PowerSchool has paid some sort of a ransom. This was not a ransomware attack, but they have apparently paid some sort of money. I guess I am hesitant to call it a ransom because, again, it's not a ransomware, in order to keep the data private. But I will say, even despite that, the adversary here apparently has no qualms about talking to the media. So I wouldn't feel, if I were them, I wouldn't feel great about having paid that money in terms of having the data protected. So
I find it impressive that they retained data from 1985 up through now. That's
it's
non-trivial.
it's very bad, and it's gonna end up being millions of people impacted. So the hackers apparently have said that there were 6,500 school districts, not schools, 6,500 school districts impacted, with the number of people impacted uh, about 72 million. So 62.5 million students and 9.5 million staff, apparently spanning almost 40 years. So, look, I think somebody said, I saw somebody post this on infosec.exchange, like, you can't steal data that you don't keep, or people can't steal data
Sure.
that you don't keep. There is no excuse. I cannot think of an excuse or a valid reason to keep student information going back 40 years in a database. Like, I don't understand what goes through your mind when you think that's okay.
Unless there's some regulatory requirement for some reason, but you would still think this would be like offline storage or something. But man, 85. You were what? Like you were 43 in 1985, right?
Yeah, I was in my middle ages. Yeah, I hit
Yeah.
middle age about then.
Yeah, you're looking good. You're looking good for 83.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel pretty good. So the other thing that seemed problematic to me is that uh, the process of figuring out whether or not you're impacted as a school district seems like a DIY adventure. And so there's actually some customers have published what they're calling unofficial guides on how to process the logs for your account. Basically download the logs for your account and what to look for to see if you were one of their customers that were impacted. So I find that stunning. Now, maybe that's because there's just so many impacted entities that, it's taking a very long time for PowerSchool to get through them all, but that is astounding to me.
So do you think they're going to get a bulk rate on purchasing credit monitoring?
My God. You know, do they even do companies even do that anymore? Like I'm not even
I
sure
think they
that
could
do
say
that.
they do. I don't know that anybody ever actually uses it. I think they just say it and then nobody
That's
calls them
true.
on it.
It's
And
a
like,
good
oh,
point.
somebody finally did. Okay, well here's
Good point. Very good point. And look, you probably already have it from other breaches anyway.
I have 74 different credit monitorings going right now. They're fighting with each other.
Good. Good. So again, I think the issue for me, there's kind of two issues. One is from the perspective of um, a consumer. Like, you've got to, I don't know what you could have done here, right? From a supplier management perspective, I just don't know that there's any number of vendor management spreadsheets that you could have thrown at this PowerSchool to have them indicate that they're risky or they're storing 40 years of your data. So that's one. But on the other side, I just don't know what to say anymore about companies that don't use multi-factor authentication,
Yeah,
especially for
seriously.
on accounts that have access to that amount of information. Now we don't know exactly how the attack was perpetrated. Like we don't know if like they just got that one ID and that gave them access to the whole thing, or if that was like the toe in the water that let them run around
Well,
the network.
it was called a maintenance account. So that to me indicates like admin
Oh, there
level.
you go.
And there's something else you could do, which is what I've been preaching for a while, which is move to the survivalist compound and homeschool your children and detach from all of this, like I am doing, and swearing off all technology.
Good. A good idea.
I mean, it's really your only option. And don't say we didn't warn you.
Thought leadership right there.
I can sell you your own bunker for a very reasonable 2.8
Oh,
million.
thought leadership. I mean, this is the kind of advice that our listeners have really come to rely on.
The awkward part of homeschooling my children is I don't have any. So I keep finding children to homeschool, and their parents really don't like them.
I thought you were talking about your cats.
No, they don't listen.
Well, my kids don't listen either. At least that's consistent. All right.
I don't even know where I'm going. This has gone off the rails. Let's move on.
So our last story for today comes from Security Week, and the title here is CISA and FBI release. An FBI update software security recommendation. So this is not a set of mandatory requirements. It's the voluntary, non-binding set of recommendations on how to better secure your software or services, and it's really focused on things that support critical infrastructure for sure, which is really where the CISA's bread and butter is. But I thought it was interesting. There's nothing in here, in my estimation, that is specifically only relevant to critical infrastructure. It's all good stuff. The actual report, this is an article about the report from CISA, but the report it's relatively long, but the actual recommendations they have aren't all that long. And it is a set of do this, don't do that kind of recommendations. So, and I'll just run through them fairly quickly. Number one is use memory safe languages, which, by the way, I think one of the documents that was produced by CISA regarding memory safe was just rescinded. So I saw someone publicly post about how using C is legal again, which I thought was kind of funny. Number two is don't pass raw user input to a database. So for your SQL injection, then don't pass raw user input to a system for execution. Do not set default passwords. I still see this an awful lot in both consumer technology and in commercial technology, where there's this concept of a default password. The preferred mechanism is that when you go and install it or provision it or what have you, that it prompts you for a password. There's no default. Next is to patch any vulnerabilities that are on the known exploited vulnerabilities list prior to release. So you basically don't release a net new thing into the wild that has a known vulnerability that's being exploited.
That's crazy talk. Look, we got to get this stuff out.
Yes, like I don't know how. I don't know how you comply with that. Like that's really going to slow things down.
Nobody got time for that.
And then also to provide free updates within 30 days of when a new vulnerability impacting your piece of software or technology has a vulnerability that is on the known exploited vulnerability list. So again, I think most of the industry expects that, but I think it's more focused on the time frame. The 30 days after patch is available, you in turn should provide a patch. And then they turn around and they treat open source differently, so that it's basically the same requirement, but more geared towards open source and talking about how you should have a software bill of materials. And starting to think that somebody in CISA was working for like SNCC or one of the one of the open source software analysis tools.
Sounds like their talking point.
Yeah. Yes. Um, only use current modern cryptographic facilities. So don't be using like MD5 and TLS 1.0. When you release a product, it should be using the current version of whatever encryption technology you're relying on. Next is don't include any hard-coded secrets in your source code. We talk a lot about that on this show. Don't use, I should say, do use phishing resistant multi-factor. And in instances that you can't, you should implement mitigations. And so they did make a call out, and we talked about this on Getting Defensive with Martin Fisher, about how some OT operations technology, like you would see in a hospital, where there's the friction that comes in from using some sort of fancy multi-factor authentication might slow things down to a point where you could cause harm. But that doesn't mean that like it's everything is a free-for-all. Like the expectation is that you've in some way mitigated the issue with not using multi-factor authentication, and I think that's going to be highly specific to whatever technology we're talking about. Let's see. Making logs available to customers in an accessible format is next.
This
And
is so targeted at Microsoft.
it really is. It really is. I remember I had the pleasure of meeting with the CSRB, the Cybersecurity Review Board, after the big Azure breach. And that was all they wanted to talk about was logs. How cloud providers need to provide logs to customers. And I don't disagree. I think it's very sensible. I think the challenge and the concern I had was they seemed to be going down this path of like, however much capacity in logs your customer generates, like you just need to facilitate that for free. And my position was like, that's kind of a bad take.
Or you have to build in the cost of the base price.
Yeah, but again, like perhaps we're saying the same thing. Like there's a consumption element there. Space isn't free, especially in the context of a cloud. And if you're a big enterprise customer and you're generating tens of gigabytes or even terabytes of logs a day, like that's pricey. And I'm not sure that I'm not sure that you're going to be competitive if you're forcing a small company who generates kilobytes of logs a day to kind of pay the same rate. So, but the concept I think is sound. Like as a customer, you need logs. You need to be able to pipe it into your SIM or what have you to know if something's going on. It's very sensible. Let's see. You need to publish complete CVEs when a vulnerability is discovered in your offering. And I think we see this. This is, by the way, is also a bit of a poke at Microsoft. And I will also say it's a bit of a poke at the cloud in general and SaaS in general, where I think CISA has historically been kind of irritated with the SaaS and cloud industry who has their own set of vulnerabilities. I'm not talking about like, my cloud runs on Red Hat and Red Hat had a vulnerability and therefore I need to go open up a CV. That's not it. It's like, as a cloud provider, I write code that runs some aspect of the cloud, and sometimes that code has vulnerabilities. And when that happens, I should go and open up a CV. And that happens very rarely. Very rarely. And I can argue both sides of that, by the way.
What about a SaaS vendor that handles all that as microservices and auto patching for the SaaS service?
So again, I can argue both sides. I don't see, my perspective on that. And this, by the way, did come up in in one of the discussions with the CSRB. But my perspective is that, like, what is a customer going to do with that? There are no user serviceable parts. Like So I publish a CVE that says that, my cloud widget has this vulnerability. We've already fixed it. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. So what is the value add in
Oh, I'll tell you.
having it?
It's going to spin up a ton of third-party risk management people to send a whole bunch of spreadsheets asking a whole bunch of questions.
You're right. You're
Because they're going to want to
absolutely right.
know, were they in any way impacted by this vulnerability while it existed?
Right. Right.
And they have to do something.
But and look, you're right. In my response to that was always, if you were impacted, we would absolutely, like, we're obligated to tell you.
No,
Like,
no. You're not truthful unless it comes in the form of a spreadsheet where we ask specific questions.
so we need to do like proactive spreadsheets.
Even then, how can we trust you if we don't ask the question?
Fair. I mean,
it's like the Wonder Woman lasso of truth. If it comes on a third-party risk management form spreadsheet, it must be true.
There could be no fibbing on those forms, for sure.
But that's exactly how this plays out, though.
Yeah. Now, so on the other side, right? On the other side, look at I think the issue that spawned a lot of this discussion, which was the Microsoft Office 365 vulnerability, where there was an issue that resulted in untold numbers of customers having their email exposed to a threat act. And so if the response is to just fix the problem silently, now obviously that didn't happen in the case of Microsoft, but I think what they're saying is that we can envision it happening where there is because it's all happening below the line and out of sight of the average person or average consumer of the service, we can envision it happening where there is a bug, there's a vulnerability that was exploited, quote, as a 0-day that was then later patched, and no one knows about it. And so you as a provider should be telling the world that, hey, we had this bug, which would then give your customers the opportunity to go and do their own investigation. Now, I have had customers who had that very discussion with me, like that. They said those very words to me, and now obviously, we had to be diplomatic to customers, right? But the thing that I always wondered was, like, what do you think you're gonna look for? Because, like, you're not the kinds of access, the plumbing that you have access to is not where you would see indicators, of a problem. The kinds
But
of
their executives are
right.
demanding their ops team do something.
We have to do something. I mean, I think it all comes back to the concept, which you're right. Like, we have to do something. We feel like we have to do something. We can't do nothing. But the reality is there isn't a lot that you can do except say, well, Jesus Christ, this is the 5th time, this provider has had an issue in a month, and so therefore, like, we're going to go find some other company that doesn't have issues like this so often. But then you have to ask, well, is it because, like, they're being overly transparent and everybody else is hiding it? That. So anyway, I think it's a very problematic area. I think it's certainly much more cut and dry with software products. And by the way, we have seen instances where software products have kind of also skirted the issue of creating CVEs. So, I think in that instance, it's a much more, it's a much easier concept. It's hard to argue against a product that you run in the infrastructure should have a CVE if there's a vulnerability like that. That is just eminently sensible. I think we would have a discussion about the SaaS and cloud side. When I put my CISO as a cloud provider hat on, I have a hard time understanding. It just creates work. All it does is create work. It doesn't in my estimation, I don't know that this is always true. Like there's going to be instances like with Microsoft, or maybe it will be true. But at least in my context and all the things that I saw, like it wouldn't have helped. There wasn't a benefit to customers in doing that. It would have just created a lot of work on both sides that didn't really accomplish anything. But on the customer side, I think, like, especially if you're a regulated entity, like, the expectation is what's going on at your provider. Yeah,
Hmm.
you are outsourcing a critical business process to a third party. If you were running that internally, like, you would have to know what was going on. But because you're really comfortable abdicating that level of insight to your provider, and that's, I think, that's the other side of it. So if I put my hat on as let's say, as a bank, or as some consumer of those services, I would say, well, like, yeah, I think they should. I think they should have C,
That's fair.
because look, I've got a whole team of people who generate spreadsheets for a job, and if I don't have CVEs, what are they going to do?
Yeah. I mean, I'm at a loss for countering that argument. It's important.
Yeah, it's important to keep those spreadsheet people busy.
I think at least a good 20% of the cybersecurity industry is those people with their spreadsheets. So it'd be devastating if we put them out of work. Can't have that. Not
It'll
only
be
the people
sad.
who create the spreadsheets, people who fill out the spreadsheets, people who read the spreadsheets, who ask questions to the spreadsheets. Like there's a lot of ecosystem there that is generating a lot of revenue,
Think about the
or at
moral
least a lot
hazard.
of,
Yeah, think about the
yeah,
impact. Think about the impact to the economy if you stop that. Like, there would be like, restaurants will go out of business
that's true. What
because
if
there
we
will be less
taxed
people.
a penny tax in every spreadsheet to raise money to support the displaced spreadsheet workers of America?
So you're not, but before that, you're saying that the spreadsheet workers need to unionize, I think.
They're not.
Oh my, this is going nowhere.
Abort.
Boy, pull up, pull up.
They can't always, all the jokes can't always work. Anyway, so back to CISA's recommendations. Yeah, I think a lot of this stuff is really just common sense, good stuff. But it's a nice thing to walk into your software leadership with and go, we should be doing this stuff. How do we get to doing this stuff? And point to it and let's say, this is government is good.
I think it's also good from the perspective of even if you're not a producer of software or services, if you're,
You should
I mean,
put these questions on a spreadsheet and ask them of your software providers.
exactly, every year.
Oh, it hurts. It hurts my
No, I
soul.
so I don't. I say that kind of flippantly, but I think it should be a set of expectations when you engage a provider. Like, you know, do you support multi-factor authentication? Does your product support multi-factor authentication? Like, it seems simple, but I can tell you that I have seen instances where you get pretty far down the integration path, and you're like, well, where's the option to turn on multi-factor authentication? Well, that's coming in the next version. That'll be in the next version.
The other thing I would say, and this could open up another whole can of worms that we don't need to get into right now, is at what maturity level of a software shop do you expect them to do all this? If they're like version 0.01 beta pre-launch, just trying to get out in the market with a novel widget, might be a lot to ask.
Perhaps, but then again, not a lot of this stuff is really radical. Like, is it like, I don't think it's too much to say, even for a brand new product from a brand new company, to say, well, you should write your product in such a way that doesn't have SQL injection vulnerabilities or command injection vulnerabilities. And I don't think you should put stuff out that has currently known critical vulnerabilities.
Agreed. But if you're a small shop and you've got a couple of software folks on board who aren't deeply trained or experienced in secure development, who's going to tell them? How would they know? Who's going to teach them?
Well, it's fair. And I guess, from the perspective of CISA, they would say, well, like, part of this, I think, is on the consumer, to know where their provider is at in that maturity cycle. Like, so if you're engaging a company to manage or software provider to manage your lunch menu, well, maybe that's okay as long as it's isolated and doesn't have like maybe that's okay. If it's to manage, some kind of valves on your water treatment plant, maybe probably not.
Yeah, that's fair. There's a criticality level that needs to be assessed there.
Anyway, I digress. So there you go.
I think I took you down the bad path first. It was my fault.
All good. That's why we're here. It's to have a discussion. If we just agree on everything and move on, then it's a boring show, right?
No, it's not. It's a great show. Why would you say that, you idiot?
Hang on. You know what? I got to do one thing.
Noki.
And
Kitty
I have
cat alert.
A very sleepy kitty cat in my arms right now.
For those who don't see our video feed, which will be up on YouTube, if you come to the end of the show, I don't know what it's going to be in the actual show, but our time hash is like 1 minute and 7 seconds. Sorry, 1 hour and 7 minutes. Whoa. But that'll probably change when we do edits. There's a Noki sighting.
Noki is just sweetest cat.
I have no idea if you picked it up on camera, but about halfway through the show, Betty climbed up on my desk. It was just to the left of camera, at least on my screen, and wanted some blood.
Security cats are the best.
They are.
Say hi.
Aw, hi, Noki.
I get some purrs on audio. There we go. All right. So thank you everybody for listening. Bye, Noki. If you like the show, give us some love on your podcast. Ouch. Guess he's not done.
He was voting with his claws.
Wow, that hurt. Yeah, I have to get some Band-Aids after this. So if you like the show, give us some love on your favorite podcast player. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can give us a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe. Thank you very much.
Like and subscribe. Hit that bell for notifications.
That's right. We can say that now. And if you're interested in following my antics on social media, you can find me on infosec.exchange. That's the URL for the website. I am at Jerry there, and I post all sorts of different nonsense and mostly pictures of cats and flowers. But I do some infosec stuff every now and then. Where can they find you?
Yep, I'm also on infosec.exchange at Lerg, L-E-R-G. I'm also still an X, which apparently makes me a bad guy nowadays, I guess some people would say. But whatever, I don't care. At Lerg as well, L-E-R-G. I go where my fans are. I'm a network effect kind of guy.
You're a man of the people.
Well, look, it still provides me value, so I'm not principled enough to walk away from that, I guess. But I'm man enough to admit I'm not principled enough to admit that I'm a man with principles. I think.
I'll leave that. I'm just going to leave that one.
Although I'm watching Noki rub on your microphone, which is pretty funny.
He is.
But hey,
he's a lover.
In all seriousness, thank you again to our Patreon supporters. This is not a free show, and we don't have ads today, so it helps. Every little bit helps to support the cost of the show, and you get to see our pretty faces if you want, which I don't know why you would, but if you can, and if you want, you can.
You also get to see prize kitties every now and then.
What else? Hey, we got another show called Getting Defensive where we do interviews of cool people. And if you know someone cool that we should interview, let us know. We're trying to fill up for our next round of interviews. We're looking for folks who are down in the trenches, actually doing the work. We're not trying to bring you sales folks or people with pitches for ideas. Folks who actually, they may have ideas, which is great, but they're practitioners. We're looking at interview practitioners, I guess is the short way to say that. So, and give it a listen. We've got a lot of really great interviews out there that I don't think have been found yet by a lot of folks, but really awesome discussions. I think we've got 10 or 11 or 12 episodes out now.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Yep. We've talked to some great people. I'm really surprised at how some of those interviews went. And, we're working on some additional people, which I think will be even more exciting to listen to. So thanks again. And if you want to find links to the stories we talked about today, you can get them on our website at defensivesecurity.org. Just look for episode 293 or 294. And with that, we will talk again next week. Thank you, everybody.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Take care.